Hey, Ralph here. Welcome back to the RHCSA tip of the week. This tip, we're going to talk a little bit about SE Linux. SE Linux tends to be potentially a fairly challenging piece of the exam for some students, and a lot of that is because there are a number of different environments that they really don't use SE Linux. They either put SE Linux into permissive mode or disabled mode, and so it's not something that a lot of administrators, have to deal with on a daily basis. Whereas, on the exam, there's going to be an expectation that you know how to, configure the basics with SE Linux. So let's kind of start out by just kind of looking at the objectives and what do we need to know, because it's a big topic, but you don't need to know everything there ever was to know about SE Linux. So let's jump out to the objectives for a moment here and just kind of take a look. So down here at the bottom of the objectives, I've got this section on managing security. And so when we look at which of these are relevant to our SE Linux discussion, it says set enforcing and permissive modes in SE Linux. Remember that it's important that we understand, how to make persistent changes on the system. List and identify SE Linux file and process context. That's pretty easy. Restore the default context of a file. So we'll look at how we restore files. We'll look a little bit at how we change the context for a file as well. We're going to have to take a look at the Booleans. So using SE Linux Booleans to modify the system settings, and then lastly, diagnose and address routine SE Linux policy violations. So there's a fair amount to cover here. But let's start out by just kind of having a little bit of a generic discussion about, what in fact SE Linux is. And let's start by talking about, the normal security controls we have on our system. So the basic owner, group, other, read, write, execute permissions model that we have in Linux is what we call discretionary access control. And what do I mean by that? Well, if I'm student, okay, and I make a file, so I'll just do a touch new file. If we look at the permissions on that file, they're set based off of my UMask, but the owner's got read write. But I'm the owner of that file. Okay, so really the setting of permissions on that particular file are at my discretion. If I say chmod 777 new file, and then we go back and look at the permissions again, you'll see that the permissions have been modified, and that's discretionary access control. And basically with discretionary access control, the level of access to files and directories is set by the owner. That obviously has some security connotations. Users, whether they be administrators or regular users, are prone to do, shall we say, dumb things. And so what SE Linux is an implementation of mandatory access controls. And when you think about mandatory access controls, think about the Department of Defense. Think about, classification of information. So things are, if a document is has a top secret. If it's a top secret document, then just because I'm the owner of the document, if you don't have the appropriate security clearance, you're not going to be able to view that document. I can't let you view that document unless you have the appropriate security clearance. And so, that's really what SE Linux is. So it doesn't replace discretionary access controls. Discretionary access controls are always going to be enforced. If I don't have discretionary access controls, standard POSIX permissions, rights to a file, there's nothing SE Linux is going to do that it's going to give me rights, but it provides another layer of security. And so the way that it's implemented, if I type in SE status here, you'll see that the loaded policy is what's called a targeted policy. And so the way that it works is that processes operate in a particular context. That processes, which we refer to as subjects in SE Linux, are going to operate in a domain. If you think about a process and let's just say like the HTTP daemon, is going to be operating, inside of a domain, which is going to limit its access to objects, and that's how we refer to files and directories and things like that, of a certain type. Okay, so for example, the files, well, maybe I'll do a square here for a file located in the web server's data directory. The web server will have access to, but there's files out on the system. One example would be like the etc password file, and the etc password file is a world readable file. In terms of discretionary access controls, any user on the system would be able to view that file. Now, because we have SELinux, and if we're running SELinux in enforcing mode, if somehow our HTTPD process was compromised, it would not have access to that particular file, okay, because that particular file is not of a type that the domain that it's running in has access to. So think of SELinux as an additional layer, okay, of access control. A lot of people have run into issues with SELinux that they didn't expect, and then they end up disabling it, or they end up putting it into permissive mode and not thinking about it again. But that's really not really the way that the system was designed. And so, if you talk to, Red Hat, for example, they have people that, go out and evangelize and really want to see more usage of SELinux. Certainly, I run into a lot of environments where people run SELinux in permissive or disabled mode, but it's that's really a convenience, and what you are doing ultimately is reducing security on your particular system. But let's go ahead and kind of take a look at some of the basics. First of all, talking about our SELinux modes, and specifically what are they, and then how do we persistently make changes. So I guess I better get out to root here, and then I'm going to change directories out here to SELinux, and in this directory you'll see that we have a file called config. And if we open up that file, open up the config file here, you'll see here that SELinux is currently set to enforcing. Okay? And my three options here are enforcing and permissive, which I can toggle back and forth between enforcing and permissive. Enforcing basically is exactly as it sounds, that the SELinux security policies are enforced. Permissive doesn't enforce the policy, but it does log violations to the SELinux policy. And then disabled is just no SELinux policy is loaded. If you want to toggle, you can toggle between enforcing and permissive very easily on a system, which is very useful from a troubleshooting standpoint. If you want to go from enforcing or permissive to disabled, or from disabled to enforcing, then that will require a reboot. And the default policy type here is a targeted. But this is how we could persistently change the behavior on the system, either to set it to enforcing or permissive, or to set it to disable. All right. Now, as I said before, you can toggle back and forth between enforcing and permissive very, very quickly. There's a couple commands here. We have let's do get enforce first. And the get enforce command will tell you what mode you're in, and I'm in enforcing mode. The set enforce, for example, I could say set enforce to 0, and that would toggle me to permissive mode. And then to re-enable enforcing mode, I just say set enforce 1. Okay, so that's really useful from a troubleshooting perspective, right? I mean, if you're running SELinux and you run into an issue, and then all of a sudden you're like, all right, well, I think this is an SELinux issue. I can quickly do a set enforce 0 and then test again, and if it works, but it doesn't work when I do a set enforce 1, then I know I've got an SELinux issue that I have to address. So those are sort of the basics there of how do we persistently change the behavior of SELinux. Now, in terms of viewing the context, which was another one of the objectives there. In terms of that, if you want to view the the SELinux context, okay, of a particular file or directory, then that would be with the capz. Okay, so if I just do an ls capz, that'll show me the context. Okay, and so we've got the system user, we've got the role, and then we've got the type. Okay, and if I do a ls capz on Etsy password, for example, you'll see that it has a very particular context, the password file _t. If we do the Etsy shadow file, for example, again, you'll see that it has a particular type as well, shadow _t. So we can use the capz to view the context of a file or directory. We can also use that, to view, the context of a particular process. So if I do a ps minus capz, then you'll see here that it shows me, the SELinux context, user, role, and type for, those particular processes in my current shell. So capz is how we view that information. Okay, so popping back to the objectives for a second, we looked at enforcing and permissive. Okay, we looked at how we list. Now let's talk a little bit about file context. Okay, so let me change over here. Go to my Samba example here. So what do I have going on here? Okay, well, I've got my my client here. This is so this screen is logged into client 0. This is my server over here. So this is SRV 0 here, and this is where the Samba server is running. And then down on the bottom here, this is also the server, but this is the audit log. Okay, so this is var log, audit log, and this is where these SELinux events are going to be logged. And so I'm just using a tail -f to follow the audit log so we can kind of see some activity as we start doing some different things. So that's what we're looking at here. So the first thing I'm going to do here from the client is I'm going to go ahead and connect to the Samba server. So let's find out what's going on the Samba server. So we'll run the SMB client, and we'll get a listing here, and you'll see here that I've created a share called class files. Okay. All right. So if I want to connect to that share, so I'll say SMB client, and then just connect as guest, and let's SRV 0, and then the class files share. All right, so far so good. Anonymous login successful. Everything looks nice. I go to do an ls, and I get access denied. Okay. Now this happens to be an SELinux issue, and I'll show you if I switch over here to the server. So now I'm back on the server, and I say set enforce 0. Okay, and then I switch back to my client, and I do an ls. You'll see that I'm able to list the contents of the directory. I can change directories in the samples. I can do an ls on samples. Everything starts working. Right when I turn off SELinux, it starts working. If I turn SELinux back on, so I'll say set enforce 1, and then I come back, do my ls, and now I'm getting denied again. Okay, and the reason for that is pretty well documented in the configuration file for Samba. Okay, so let me zoom in on the this particular window for a second, and let's go take a look at that. So if I take a look at the Samba configuration file, okay, so Etsy Samba smb.com, and I'll go to the beginning of the file, and you'll see right at the top of the file here, we've got these security enhanced Linux notes. Okay, so there's a number of notes built into this file that really kind of let you know that, if you're going to be running SELinux, then there's some things that you need to think about. Okay. And what we're specifically going to focus on here, is, let me come down here, this particular section here, where it says, set the SELinux labels only on files and directories you have created. So use and it says use the change context command, but change context only doesn't change the policy. What that does is that changes the context in a temporary way. And we want to make sure that if for some reason somebody restores the context or relabels our file system, that it's still in fact going to work. But in terms of valuable information here, it does tell us the type that we want to use, Samba_share_T. Okay. Now the tool, I'm gonna go ahead and get out of here. The tool that we use for setting the context, the tool I would recommend that you use is SE Manage. Now, if I do a man -K on SE Manage, you'll see that there is a number of man pages for this particular tool. And we are interested in, working with the file context and in fact, changing the file context of that directory. And so that's the man page that I'm going to look at here. So I'll say man SE Manage -F context. And if I go to the bottom of this file, there's some nice examples on exactly what I need to do. Okay, so this is what I do to change the file context, and then I have to run the restore con in order to apply that change. So in this case, I'm changing the context and then the default context, and then I have to restore that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and highlight this line here and go ahead and quit out of my man page, and then I'm going to go ahead and paste that. And then I'm going to make the appropriate changes. So we had here Samba_share_T, and the directory that I'm actually sharing is the Enterprise Linux 2 directory. I think that looks good. And that's going to include all the subdirectories. Now, if I do a ls -capzd for that particular directory, oops, you'll see here that it didn't change the context. It's still using that default T because there's a two-step process here. So I've changed the default context, and now I need to run my restore con, recursively for my Enterprise Linux 2 directory. Okay. Now when I rerun my ls command, it's got the right context. Okay. So I think I've fixed my problem, and I'm going to go ahead and unzoom out, and we'll come back over here, and I'll do an ls, and I'm working. Okay. I'm still in enforcing mode. Okay. If I do a get enforce, you'll see I'm enforcing, but now I am able to browse my directories, download files. And the reason for that is because I changed the file context. So again, to view the file context, CapZ, to modify file context, use SE Manage and restore con. That's the most robust way to do that. The change context command will change the context, but if somebody were to restore at a later point, it would go back to whatever its default context was, and then we'd be broken again. So SE Manage is the best option there. And again, it's very well documented in the man page. All right, so that deals with file context. Now, the next thing that they talk about here in the objectives is the use Boolean settings to modify SE Linux system settings. Okay, so there are a number of different Booleans that we can toggle on and off that affect the behavior of SE Linux. So if we come out here, and I've got another, let's see, Control BW. Whoop. Not sure that's what I want to do. All right, let's go to our FTP example. Okay, so again, what we have here is we've got our client over here, and then over here we've got our server. Okay, and again, we're just sort of following the audit log and kind of see events pop in and out as we do things. Okay, so I am going to FTP over to the server. So I'll say FTP SRV 0. And I'll log in as student. and I'll get connected to my home directory. I'll do an ls, and I've got a couple files in there. So if I try to get the test file, so I'll say get test file, okay. And I get a message, failed to open file. Okay. Now I've got a sneaky suspicion that this is an SELinux issue. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to say set enforce 0, turn SELinux temporarily off on the server. It says, hey, you got to be root to do that. All right, I can do that. And as root, I think I'll have a little bit more success here. Set enforce 0, confirm it with a get enforce. All right, we're in permissive mode now. Go back over here and let's try that again. So get test file. And it worked, no problem. Transferred the file, everything worked fine. Okay, so, okay, we've got another SELinux issue here. How are we going to handle that? So I'm going to go ahead and get out of my FTP session for a second here. Come back over here and let's turn SELinux back on. So we'll say set enforce 1, and we'll confirm that. All right, now this, whether or not users can, interact with files in their home directory with FTP is actually controlled with a what we call the Booleans. So again, I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on this window for the server. When we're dealing with SELinux Booleans, there are a couple different commands, really 3 different commands that I want to bring to your attention. So one is just the get SEBool. If we do that, get SEBool -a, it will show us all of our Booleans. Now, let's parse that list down a little bit, and let's say grep for FTP. And you'll see here that we've got right at the top there, FTP home dir, and that Boolean is currently set to off. I'm pretty sure that's the Boolean that I want, but you'll notice there's really not a description here if you use the get SEBool. Okay. Now, we can also work with Booleans with SEManage. Okay. So if I say SEManage and then Boolean, and this does support command completion, -L to list, and then I'll grep that for FTP. You'll see that if I do that, I get at least some description of what that Boolean actually does. Okay. So again, if I hadn't issued the grep statement, it just would have listed obviously all of my Booleans, but in this particular case, I am really just interested in the FTP Booleans, so I just grep that for FTP. Now, in order to set this, okay, we have a set SE Boolean. But remember, everything we do really needs to be persistent, right? And so let's go ahead and pop that man page open for a second and sort of look at our options, okay? So if the -p option is given, all pending values are written to the policy on disk, so they will be persistent, okay? So we want to use the -p option in order to set this. All right, so I'll say set SE Boolean -p. And this does also support tab completion. So I can just type in FTP and _ home directories. All right, it's going to take a little while to write that policy. So now we're saying, all right, we're going to allow users to access their home directories. I'll go ahead and confirm that. And I can use SEManage to confirm it. Okay, so there I see I'm on currently, and I'm also on persistently. I could also use, the get SEBool -a, and then grep that for FTP as well. That would also show me that FTP home dirs is on. All right, let me unzoom out. Let's see if that solved our problem. So I do a get enforce just to confirm that SELinux is in fact on. It is in enforcing mode. So now let's try and download that test file too and see if it's working now that we have the appropriate Boolean set. So if I go ahead and reconnect over FTP, actually go ahead and clear, come back to the top here, log back in as student, enter in student's password, do an ls, and then let's go ahead and try it. So we'll say get test file 2. It worked just fine. All right, so now that we have the appropriate Boolean set, it worked just fine. So we looked at, just a review here, we looked at how we set enforcing permissive modes and how we do that persistently, the etc Selinux config file. Looked at listing context, that's just cap Z, whether we're talking about processes or files. We looked at setting and restoring file context, so we can set the default file context with SC manage, and we can restore it with the restore con tool. We looked at, get SC bool, set SC bool for Boolean settings, and then lastly here it says diagnose and address routine SC Linux policy violations. So along the way here, I have created some policy violations. And if you've been watching over here on the right, we've seen some events occurring. So there's a couple different ways that we can manage this. Let me go back over to the server for a second here, because that's where we've had, our events. And I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on this particular window again. And so a couple different options here. Okay, so certainly like determining you have an SC Linux problem, you can use set enforce and just toggle back and forth between, enforcing and permissive mode. But I mean, there's a couple different, commands that we can use to search the audit log. There's an audit search, and let's see, I'll look for ABC events. And there's a number of different events, okay, that have been happening, our Samba events, our VSFTP type events, the audit report. We can use the audit report command, and that'll show me a number of the events that we had happen here in class. But what I like to do, okay, so what these events will do is they will generate messages in the main system log, in var log messages. And so if you grep for SE alert in your main system log, var log messages, you'll see that I get a number of different, lines here. Okay, and kind of pull this out for a second. So server 0 troubleshoot, SE Linux is preventing the VSFTP daemon from the get attribute access on directory home student music, and then it says at the end, it says run SE alert -L, and then it gives you this code. Okay, so if I type in SE alert -L, and then I paste in this value, and I'm going to go ahead and pump that out to, I'll go to less, why not? That one didn't work. Let me try my Samba event here. That could be SE alert -L. All right, that one looked better. All right, so the nice thing I like about this, is if you grep the system log on SE alert and then you find your event, you'll see here that it tells you exactly what was going on. It says SE Linux preventing user sbin SMBD, the Samba daemon, from access to the file Enterprise Linux 2 sample 16. Okay? And then it tells you how to fix it. It says if you want to fix it, then run SE manage, set it to this context, okay, and then run restorecon. Now it doesn't, it's too specific, right? In the sense that it's just telling us about one particular file. So it's not exactly, you know, the catch-all fix, you know, for everything in the Enterprise Linux 2 directory, the one that I was sharing, but it does certainly get you going on the right path. Okay, so if you just grep for SE alert in the main system log and var log messages, you know, you can get the report, and from there, hopefully it'll give you enough information that you can kind of figure out what in fact is going on. Okay. So if you do have to resolve a particular issue, that's probably the place that I would recommend that you would start. Okay. So again, you know, there's a chance that you created the issue, right? And so they say diagnose and address routine SE Linux policy violations. It could be related to something that you've done. So it is important to kind of understand, you know, how we can test if it's an SE Linux issue with, you know, with set and force and putting it into permissive mode, and then also, you know, where we would go to generate reports about the audit log or searching for SE alert in the main system log. So hopefully this gives you a, you know, a picture of what's going on with SE Linux in terms of what you need to know for the exam. It's certainly a much deeper topic than, you know, what we've discussed to this point, but that really covers the basics of the things that you're, you know, probably going to be expected to know on the exam. Hope you enjoyed this tip, and we'll see you again.